Good morning, everyone. This is Professor Hill. It's a short video for our class, Introduction to Ethics Philosophy 2306, here at St. Philip's College for Maymester of 2022. And today is indeed Tuesday, the last day of May, the 31st of May, 2022. And we're in our last week of class. So that's kind of exciting because we're wrapping it all up. We are trying to finish reading that last block of chapters 4, 5, and 6. We saw 4 the last time, so we're really just doing 5 and 6, which are kind of a pair. They're like bookends. And we're doing that in preparation of turning in the final essay, which is tomorrow night, Wednesday, June the 1st at midnight. That's the last day of classes for the Maymester semester. And then the following day, Thursday, June the 2nd, is when our final exam is due. So, like I said, this is it. The calendar and everything is in the module under the syllabus, the schedule. But I just want to remind everybody, we're coming to the end. This is it. This is the final wrap up. So, we're looking at the case study involving the Nash family. I talked a little bit about that yesterday and talked about some of the issues which arise in the course of talking about what their options were in terms of how to treat their sick daughter, Molly. In the end, as we've seen, they created a new child, Adam, so that they could extract stem cells from Adam's umbilical cord and then use those in a transplant for their daughter, Molly. And indeed, it worked. It was a case of first impression, meaning this was the first time the technology had been available to do the actual testing and scanning of the fertilized egg cells as part of the in vitro fertilization process, meaning that they had taken sperm from Jack, the father, an egg from Lisa, the mom, and then put them together multiple times in order to have fertilized egg cells that they could then test and screen to make sure that they were both free of the Fanconi anemia they were trying to cure in their daughter Molly, but then also were a good tissue match so that they would have a reliable donor for Molly. And it worked. They created several, implanted several, got down to just the one Adam. But Adam was born healthy and was able to then donate the cells to the sister. From the parents' point of view, they're like, this was a win. But it did raise lots of fundamental issues about the ethics of the process, which, again, if you believe that personhood, not just life, but personhood begins at conception, then you would have problems with the process because it involves discarding fertilized egg cells that aren't of any value to you in the process. It involves a risky implantation process where they have to kind of overbook the number of fertilized cells that are implanted because they know they're going to lose some and they want to get down to at least one, which is why you also end up with multiple births oftentimes in the process. But we also talked about not just the issue of trying to decide when personhood begins, which you would need to do as a threshold issue for this case, but also about this kind of the issue of eugenics and how that kind of comes up here once we get into trying to intentionally design a process which gets you a human being that you're going to create as a therapy for another person. And it's going to have certain characteristics that you need. In this case, they're trying to create the perfect match to help cure their daughter. And so you're right square in the middle of eugenics and what's the proper or improper use of the technology which is available. Now, listen, there are lots of issues to kick around with eugenics and with when does life begin. And people are going to be arguing about this a lot in the immediate future because we've been talking about this issue, meaning the issue of the origin of human personhood, ever since there was a leak from the Supreme Court a few weeks ago of a draft opinion in which the Supreme Court overruled Roe v. Wade. That official document has not yet been released as of today, May 31st, but it's going to be soon. And there is a current serious federal investigation into why and how this got leaked. But it's going to be, it looks like, a monumental shift in American law and jurisprudence after 50 years of Roe. So it doesn't hurt to spend some time thinking about these things ahead of time, reading about them, and getting an informed opinion about these things. And it's one of the things we got to talk about for the case here. I'll link a couple of other previous videos where I've talked about some of these issues. But one of the basic issues, which has to be dealt with by the side of folks which says life and personhood begins at conception, there's a couple of basic arguments against that position. One of which is, well, look, so you're saying a fertilized egg cell from the moment of conception is a person. Yes. Well, doesn't that kind of beg the difference between potential and actuality? Meaning that when you look at like a small acorn, it's the acorn of an oak tree, but it's not an oak tree. A big giant oak tree in my yard won't fit easily into my shirt pocket, but an acorn would. I mean, there are differences. Are they related? Yes. Is it a difference of just gradation, meaning small steps that are all related at each level, versus a difference in kind or substance? Well, yeah, there needs to be, we have to recognize that there are differences between between what it actually is and something which has the potential to become something else. And look, if you take the acorn, you put it in the ground and you water it and it gets lots of light and warmth and the conditions are right, over time, that can grow into a small sapling and then a little tree and then a big, huge acorn. It has the potential to do that. That's how we describe that process. But you also have to acknowledge that it's also not an oak tree at the beginning of that process. That's an argument which needs to get addressed. The other thing too is, here's the thing about fertilized egg cells and in the in vitro process. Turns out I mentioned yesterday, we've learned a lot of this technology through vets and animal husbandry, and the perfection of this technology, especially on large animals. And one of the things that they have discovered is that you can take a fertilized egg cell and freeze it in like liquid nitrogen, really, really cold temperatures, and leave it there for a long time. And then decades later, pull that back out, thaw it out, and implant it and have that grow into a normal fetus, a normal healthy baby. That raises, and this happens already with human beings, right? We now know that you can, because we've seen it, it's worked. You can create fertilized egg cells, freeze them, store them, And at least so far, just given the passage of time, we know that now 20 years can go by and you can implant them and have a healthy baby. That's a powerful thought, not least of which is to be consistent. If you want to say that life and personhood begins at conception, you got to say that it began back when it was created and frozen. So does that mean that when you thawed out 20 years later and then you got 9 months of gestation and then this baby is born, when that baby is born, does that baby have the right to vote because it's really 21 years old? Can that baby buy cigarettes and beer and get drafted? Because personhood and age in our society gives you certain rights. What about, we don't know this yet because not enough time has passed yet in terms of the creation of the technology. What if we do it for 65 years? And then you unfreeze that little frozen fertilized egg cell and implant it. As soon as that kid is born, can they start pulling down Social Security retirement benefits? Because, they're 65 and they're going to retire. A lot of these type questions have been encapsulated in there was an essay that a philosopher wrote talking about how, look, and again, this was a hypothetical, but it was kind of trying to make the point about this thing, about the difference or similarity between persons. And the way they wrote this article and set this up was, look, if there was a fire at one of these in vitro fertility clinics, and people were rushing out of the clinic because it was on fire, and you had to make a choice between a cylinder, like a frozen tank, like this one I got in the corner back here, which used to be a keg. But if there was a giant metal cylinder like this, and it had 1,000 frozen embryos in there, all frozen in liquid nitrogen, and you could grab that, or a 6-month-old healthy baby sitting on the counter, which one would you pick to save and rush out of the building with? Well, it's a rhetorical question, and the author says, well, look, of course you're going to save the little baby. But does it make sense if you really sincerely believe that personhood begins at conception and that there's 1,000 people in there and that you could save 1,000 lives over just this one? Now that's how philosophers play with these things in terms of fictional cases they make up. But it does get at the issue. And that issue is at the heart of this case study. We've got to talk about that. Because if you believe that if there's 1,000 real live living but frozen human beings in a can, what rights do they have? What argument would you make that they don't have certain rights? If they're persons, should they be counted in the census we just did? That affects, representation in Congress and districting. Apart from the fact about the whole thing about should they have a right to vote or drink or smoke when they're born, go back to just simply, do they have a right to be born? If they are actual living real persons, does that create a demand on us, a responsibility to ensure that they're born? If Jack and Lisa create 200 of these in a lab, do they have to give birth to all 200 or at least try? You should know that the current state of the law doesn't recognize this. This came up actually the first time in a divorce case where there was a couple that were trying to conceive. They went to the IVF clinic, fertility clinic, created a bunch. We're in the process of trying to implant some of them so that the wife could get pregnant. When other tensions in their marriage broke down the marriage, they separated in the middle of the process, and they're now in court getting divorced, and they're separating assets. And the wife says, I want all the fertilized eggs from the fertility clinic. And the husband says, I want them all myself. And she says, well, I want them all because I want to implant them and continue to try to have a baby. And he says, I want them all to prevent that very thing from happening. I do not want this. I want to take them and destroy them. So the first question to the court is, well, are they people? If they're people, they can't be summarily destroyed. And he comes back and says, look, they're not persons, they're property. Community property state, you're going to split all the assets equally. We're going to split these in half too. You know, you get 100, you get 100. And the husband says, no, hold on, stop. If you give her even half, she's going to implant them and make me a father against my will. I'm saying I don't want to do this. And the judge says, well, you should have thought about that when you started the process. That's a consequence of your earlier decisions. I'm sorry. But the real groundbreaking finding there was that the jurisprudence is going to treat them as property, not as like children to have a custody dispute over. Will that change next month with the overruling of Roe, with the passage of laws in states already where they're saying we're going to rule that in our state, life is going to begin at conception, meaning personhood. And I got to tell you, there's going to be 1,000 consequences to them rushing to make this state law. Lots of people are excited about this because it reflects their values and beliefs. Other people are unhappy about it because it's going to restrict reproductive rights of women. Other people are standing in the middle saying, you have not thought this through because there's going to be all these legal repercussions and also moral and ethical ones as well. But there's really good points being raised on both sides. And I hate to say this, but there really are people of goodwill and, good arguments on both sides of this case. You need to sort your way through what you think and make your decision about that. But especially when we get into like the comments section, as always, please be civil, even when you're discussing this with somebody with whom you completely disagree. That's something which is you're going to need to take seriously. Because like I said, I've been talking about all the reasons why it doesn't make sense to have personhood begin at conception, but there are arguments on that side, not least of which is, from the very moment of conception, some genetic things are set. The color of your eyes are set. They didn't get determined later. If this frozen fertilized egg cell is implanted, attaches to the uterine wall, grows, develops, goes through gestation, 9 months later, at the end of this process, it's not going to be a chair. It's not going to be a Cadillac. It's going to be a baby, and one with a set number of, genetic traits. This is the thing about the acorn and the tree. There's a difference between an acorn and a tree, but that acorn isn't going to grow and turn into, a football. These things are linked together. The question is, what does that mean? Because again, look, we can see every aspect of this process. This isn't a question about biology and chemistry. We know exactly what's happening. We can see it. You can go to YouTube right now and watch every single step of gestation, from conception, growth, development, cytoblast, fetus, infant. You can see it all. The problem is looking at this process and then trying to figure out exactly, pinpoint where is it a human being? Because if you don't, this is the best argument on this side, which is if you don't think it begins at conception, okay, smarty pants, where do you think it does begin? 1 week, 6 weeks, 18 weeks? Because we're imposing upon this scientific observable process a meaning and understand it, because we have to have legal definitions, for example, for public policy. So we have to decide this, but we're attaching meaning to it. And the question is why? What undergirds those arguments, and which ones make sense to you? Some arguments make sense to some people, the opposite to the folks on the other side of the fence. And we're going to be having a lot of these conversations this summer in 2022 because, man, it is coming down the pike. That Supreme Court official opinion is coming, and it is going to have massive repercussions for the whole country. So that's coming, and these issues are going to be at the heart of it. And so you need to be thinking about these things. Not least of which is because tomorrow night you got an essay due. All right, look, I'm already over time here, but keep thinking about all of these factors in the Jack and Lisa Nash case study. I'll come back tomorrow, Wednesday, June the 1st in the morning, when the day that it's due. Again, I'm checking in with everybody in terms of messages, trying to respond right away if you got questions about the essay or the final exam, which is due when? That's right, the next day, Thursday, June 2nd. All right, take care. I will talk to you soon. If you need me, let me know. Contact me. I'm happy to help. Take care, y'all. Bye.